Okay, good morning. Good morning, and I'd really like to offer you a really warm welcome to the 2021 Retail Bulletin HR Summit. For the second year, we're running an online event. I know many of us would have really liked to have been in person with you in central London, but for quite obvious reasons, to guarantee today could go ahead, we've kept it virtual. But I suppose we'd like to think that it does have its great practical benefits as well. So welcome to this online event. My name is Paul Deeprose. I'm the founder of the Career Gym, and I'll be your host for today's proceedings. As a leadership coach and career coach, I've had a privileged insight over the pandemic period, over the last 18 months or so, into the challenges faced by employees and business leaders about their concerns, their fear of not knowing, exhaustion, tough decision making. And I, like many of you as well, have seen enormous resilience, tenacity, hope turning into greater clarity and positive action. This change has often needed to be linked with doing things completely differently, or in the words of Charles Handy, starting a second curve. As HR leaders, we've had to take the leap onto this next curve, embracing its uncertainties and confidently showing the way, and no more so than in three overarching areas: organizational leadership, talent acquisition and retention, and workplace well-being. And that's why this year we've chosen to run 3 panel discussions, each in turn focusing on these highly important topics. So before I highlight the agenda, there's just a couple of administrative points I'd like to raise, if I may. Firstly, our panelists will be taking questions. These are most likely to be addressed at the end of their sessions. Questions can be posed at any time through the chat function on Zoom here. So please type in your questions when you have them and feel free to address them to a particular individual on the panel if you feel that's appropriate. We will be recording all of the sessions today. So the recording will be available for you to review after the event, and we'll send you the link to do that. It will be on YouTube, in fact, so you can search it there as well. However, we won't be publishing the Q&A sessions at the end of those panel discussions. This is just to protect any slightly sensitive areas that you may wish answers on. So just to be clear, the full panel discussions will be published, but not the Q&As. So do feel free to ask anything that you feel is appropriate. And if it's not obvious, you may find gallery view in Zoom the best setting to view the panels on, but obviously that's just a personal preference. And last but no means least, today wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So a very big thank you to DWF, Elucidat and Softworks for your continuing support of this event. And we're really looking forward to hearing contributions from all our partners throughout the day on those sessions. So the agenda. Following the panel I'm about to introduce, from 1 to 2 o'clock, we've got a panel discussion on talent acquisition and retention in what we know are unprecedented times for retail and hospitality. And from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we have an amazing panel discussion on the ever-increasing importance of well-being and mental health strategies. However, to kick us off, well, I'm delighted to hand over to Mock O'Keefe, who is the founder of the Innovation Beehive. He's going to guide us through our first panel, which is talking about post-pandemic leadership. So I'm sure you'll really enjoy the content of the day. Stick with us through all 3 sessions, please do. And to kick us off, as I say, let me hand you over to Mock. Mock, over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. And echoing Paul's Very warm welcome. So lovely to be joining you again this year. And I see from the delegate list, we have a number of people who've returned and some new faces, which is absolutely fabulous. So I'm Mock O'Keefe, and I'm the founder of an HR and innovation consultancy called the Innovation Beehive. We exist to unlock potential of individuals, teams, leaders, and brands, focusing on culture, employee value propositions, pure play innovation, service experiences. So in a moment, I'll be leading a panel with some fabulous attendees, and I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. But before that, I'd just like to address headline this issue of where we are and where our energy levels are. Our panel today will focus on how are we, how are our energy levels, and how do we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our organizations, so they can take care of our customers. I'm going to talk just before we go into the panel a little bit around some thinking we've been doing at the Innovation Beehive around how you might want to re-energize yourself so that you can step up to what we like to call, very similar to what Paul, you said, second curve, second set mentality. We're in the second set now. I think as an HR community, we won the first set. Now we're into the second set. And how do we have the right mentality and the energy to make sure that we can deliver upon what's required? So at the beginning of the pandemic, at the Innovation Beehive, we undertook some research to look at previous big global disruptions, things like the Spanish flu, world wars, to see if there were some lessons and some guidance we could take and share with our clients. And the outcome of this research resulted in what we called the roadmap through uncertainty. And that identified 4 stages that we would all go through during the pandemic. And although none of those stages are really linear, we have seen each of them over the last 19 months. So I'll go through those stages with you with a particular focus on energy. So the first stage, and we all experienced this right at the very beginning, was what we called stabilize. This was like, what is happening right now? What is coming at us at 100 miles an hour? How do we put the structures and processes in place to manage our people and to continue to deliver our work? A lot of this stage was exhilarating. Some people actually found it exciting, but it was also very frightening. We were all forced to think really innovatively about how we worked and how we communicated. Many organizations actually discovered new opportunities and even new business models. And we all saw and experienced huge digital transformation. So the second stage of the roadmap through uncertainty was sustain. So we began to realize, and we had said this several times in Zoom calls, I'm sure, we're running a marathon, not a sprint. It wasn't all going to be over by Christmas. And actually, Christmas that year was very different from any Christmas we've ever experienced before. Those of us who had the luxury of working from home began to feel that we were living at work. Our frontline colleagues, well, they could feel isolated because of furlough. We had to work hard to keep their engagement level high. We ran socials, we had walk and talk meetings, and our conversations started to focus on elements such as well-being and work-life balance. But we began to feel exhausted by the very technology that had been so enabling during the stabilize phase. And the third stage, although it was a stop, start, told you it wasn't linear, is return. Now, many of us in retail and hospitality have actually never been away from work. Although some of our outlets closed, many of our support staff and certainly line managers did work from home, but many of them actually stayed out there serving our customers on the front line. And return for our frontline colleagues was often frightening and confusing. So we as an HR community, we worked hard to ensure that our colleagues felt safe at work, and we were and are being fair as we manage shifts and workload. And now we're beginning to move into the last stage, which is renew. So as we move into a world where we live with COVID, I don't like to say beyond COVID or post-COVID. I think we are all starting to say we will live with COVID. This renew phase is about facing forward with an energy and an enthusiasm for the future. This could be an opportunity to reset the business and to reset ourselves. But make no mistake, this stage is going to be very hard. We are tired. Some of us are exhausted. So how do we go about resetting ourselves and the business? Because as leaders, we must do both. We cannot reset and move our business boldly forward if we don't have the right mindset or the right energy levels ourselves. And with conversations about, possible fourth waves, slowing uptake of vaccines, fuel crisis, cost of living increases, supply chain issues, changes to universal credit, my goodness, there's a lot for us to be dealing with. Enough stuff on our plates that could take the last drop of energy that we actually have when it is so needed to help us move forward and help the organizations that we lead move forward. So how do we go about doing that now? How do we renew ourselves? So at the Innovation Beehive, we've identified how exceptional leaders lead. And I'll share that with you with a focus on re-energizing yourself in order to re-energize your teams and then re-energize the business. So an exceptional leader leads in 5 ways. They lead with head, heart, health, habit, and in history. So let me explain a little bit around that. You have to practice each of the 5 H's I'm going to tell you about on yourself first. You must personally walk the talk of re-energizing before you're able to take others on a re-energizing journey. You cannot do the latter without the former. And I know as a community of HR practitioners, it's not something we often do. The cobbler's children in our world often don't have shoes, but we must look after ourselves so we can look after our people. So leading in head is all about making sure that you have your business processes and your systems in place. If you don't have these systems in place and the appropriate ones for us now, having gone through COVID, you'll be expanding energy by reinventing the wheel every time a situation or a problem occurs. So take some time to look at processes like your financial reporting systems, like your people reporting systems, and ask yourself, do you have the data and the information you need in a world where customer habits have changed so significantly? Revisit your store structure. What do your people need to be focusing on now in order to respond to the changing needs of your customer? By focusing in head and working with other support functions, you can maximize the efficiency and relevancy of all the processes that are available to you. That will then help you better manage the business, but crucially, avoid you spending time and energy on constantly reinventing. That is exhausting. The second element is about leading in heart. This is about taking a moment to reflect on what is important to you. A conversation with yourself to really consider what motivates and inspires you personally. And an honest conversation to say, is it the same now as it was at the beginning or before the pandemic? We've got this expression at the Innovation Beehive. We call it the duvet chuck. Why do you chuck back the duvet in the morning and come to work? So what is your personal duvet chuck? Take some time to really think and reconnect with your life goals. We've been going 100 miles an hour, often dealing with what's right in front of us. So just stop and pause. What's your life goals? What kind of life do you want to live? And how is the work you're doing now moving you closer towards it? Because in summary, if your heart is in it, then can you have meaningful conversations with your people about what motivates and inspires them? And then through these conversations, hopefully, you'll be able to make the connection between your organization's ambitions and the hopes and dreams of people in your team. And that's where you get real fuel and real energy. Now, Paul's already alluded to the next element, which is about leading in health. So conversations around well-being and resilience have increased exponentially over the course of the last 19 months. We launched a leadership program for a client in 2019 that didn't have anything in it about resilience and well-being. We launched it in North America at the end of the year. We rejigged it online, and now there's a whole module on leading yourself in health and well-being and resilience. You would not have a leadership module without it now. And it's great that these conversations are taking place. But for many, the idea of managing our well-being has potentially just become another thing we have to do, something else to beat ourselves up with, something else we haven't done. So to help you re-energize in health, I'm going to suggest you don't set yourself that goal of running a 5K marathon, but rather, or 5K run, as much as I love the app, but look at just implementing some little micro health interventions. These little small micro interventions are things you can do that take minimal effort or planning, but cumulatively can have a big impact on your energy levels. So I do 2 minutes of stretching in the morning. Literally, it's 2 minutes of stretching in the morning. I don't book an online yoga class because I haven't got time to book it. And if I book it, I probably won't turn up to it because a Zoom meeting will go into my diary. Let's be honest. But I can do a downward dog in my pajamas first thing in the morning, and I do. And that's enough. You know, could it be just things like substituting a coffee after 4 o'clock with a glass of water or a herbal tea, a small reduction in your caffeine intake, which will then mean you'll get hopefully a better night's sleep and feel a bit more hydrated. So little small health interventions that are achievable, as opposed to those big things that you get on your phone saying, right, now go for a 35-minute walk. Well, actually, I've got to do an interview and prep for it. I haven't got time to do that walk now, but I might have 2 minutes to get on the floor and do a bit of a stretch. The fourth element of the 5 elements of exceptional leadership is about habit. Now, from a retail and hospitality perspective, I believe this is about taking time out now to be with your people. So many support staff continue to work from home for a significant portion of the week. But if we're going to rebuild an organization where we're united and we move forward together, we need to encourage our support colleagues to spend time with our frontline teams. It's always been important to go out and spend time in our stores, in our restaurants, working on the tills, standing alongside people, bagging up. But now, more than ever, spending time with our people helps us to gain empathy into what really is working well for them and what challenges they are facing. So much has changed because of COVID, and it's important that our head office teams really appreciate the challenges and opportunities that our frontline people are experiencing every single day when they turn up for their shift. So being alongside each other will promote deeper levels of understanding and takeaways that head office staff can use to re-examine systems and processes to make sure that our colleagues on the front line can do the best job they can do right now. And what about you? How do you lead in health? Well, it's about taking some time out for you to recognize how far you've come in the last 19 months. Getting into the habit of reflecting what you've done to adapt to change and how you've responded with agility to that business need will refuel that energy backpack that you've got on your back. Taking time to reflect on how far you've advanced things and congratulate yourself on what you've learned, and connecting into that positive feeling allows you to really think about, what have I done? What have I achieved? What am I capable of? What am I proud of? And that will refuel your energy pack. So just take a couple of minutes. I do it once a week, not focusing on what you could have done better, but actually calling out for yourself as a habit what you've done well. And then connecting that feeling of success to recharge and energize yourself. And the last one, before I bring our fabulous panelists in, is about leading in history. And this is a big one. This is kind of the existential question. This is about your legacy. I know, James, you're interested in that. It's about what you want to leave behind when you've left your current organization. Leading in history is about understanding what you want to be remembered for. So how will your leadership have impacted the life of your team members and the customers that they serve? This is one step beyond leading in hard. It's about projecting yourself forward to the end of your days and asking yourself, if you could look back and say you've lived a life well, what would that life look like? Would you be proud of what you focused on? Would you be proud of what you've achieved? Did you have a positive impact on those around you? And then jumping back to where you are now and asking yourself, if you keep moving forward with your current course of life, will you be able to answer these questions in a positive way, in the way that you would hope to? And if not, what do you need to do about it? Because this is an opportunity to reset yourself as well as your organization. We can all derive an energy from knowing our life has a purpose, and that when we leave the world, we'll leave it slightly better than it was when we came into it. So we're in the final stage, the renew phase, and exceptional leaders focus on head, getting the processes in place, heart, understanding what's really important to them and their team members, health, little small micro interventions, not the 5 couch to 5K, habits, spending time with the front line and reflecting on what you've done that's really well and connecting into that energy, and history, thinking, am I doing and living the life that I want to live? So I'm going to bring in our panelists now. And James, I'm interested in your thoughts there. I talked a little bit around kind of leading in history. I know you're quite interested in that, but before I do go into that question with you, I'm going to ask James and then Vicky just to introduce yourself to everyone. Say hi, tell them a little about who you are and where you work and what you do there. So do you want to go first, Vicky?
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Vicky Young. I'm the Head of Leadership Programmes and Events at BRC. I work within the learning team as part of British Retail Consortium. It's hard to get that out. So part of my role is looking after our leadership development programmes, but I also have quite a strong history in HR. So I've worked in senior HR roles within the travel retail industry for the last sort of 15 plus years. Too long to mention, really, with a real focus on personal development, project management, well-being, employee engagement and culture. And yeah, if I go back many, many, many years, there's McDonald's, Woolworths, those sorts of traditional retailers that are still there as well. So really glad to be part of the panel today and to get to have a bit of a chat with James and yourself, Mark.
Super, lovely, thanks, Vicky. It's a great experience you'll be able to bring, I'm sure. And James, number 2 contestant, introduce yourself, where you're from, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mark. I'm James Hampton. I work for Sea Salt, or Sea Salt Cornwall, ladies fashion brand based in the southwest in Cornwall, obviously, and Falmouth. My background, I'm ex-military in the RAF for 9 years. I've taught for 4 or 5 years, and sort of more recently in the learning and development field. I'm head of development and engagement at Sea Salt, so that means I look after what would be a traditional learning development team, but we've changed it to performance and development. I have quite strong feelings of focusing too heavily on the word learning, but I also look after all of our leadership development in the business, as well as our well-being and our communications.
Super, lovely, great to have you as a panelist today. And I'm going to come to you first, because I know when we were talking in the kind of pre-sessions about the whole idea of leadership legacy. So I talked a bit about leading in history. I'm just wondering what your reflections are on that. And personally, if you're happy to share, what do you want your leadership legacy to be?
Yeah, I think, well, I take the kind of stance that everyone is a leader. You don't need a title or a hierarchy to kind of create that. And I think when you start to realize that, then, you know, as a person, you can choose kind of what you want to lead in, or what you want to do with yourself. You talked about a sense of purpose, and I think for me, if you can connect to that sense of purpose, you lead, you know, in the way that you're really comfortable with. Some of that requires a bit of self-awareness, and you talked a little bit about that, being aware of yourself and, you know, working out who you want to be. And then I think you can really connect those things together. You can empower followership from that too. There's so many people out there. I mean, Greta Thunberg's a really great example of someone that doesn't have any hierarchy or any title, and has just assumed this role, planetary role in leadership. So I think, yeah, when you look at it in that way, you can kind of see that it's slightly different. In terms of leading a legacy, then, for me, it's about getting out the way and letting other people succeed. So, you know, really kind of making yourself redundant as a leader, setting a great example, but really being there as a supportive or subservient leader, so that the teams around you or those that do follow you have the greatest impact. So on the teams have way more impact than just one person. So if you can galvanize trust and support, and you can empower people to move things forward because they're connected to how you see it, then that's a much stronger place to be. And then I suppose from a legacy point of view, what you do is you leave a fantastic thing behind you there. And I suppose that connects to kind of what I would like to be able to do myself. Really.
I love it. I mean, I'm all about, our business is about, so I'm the CEO of unlocking potential. So I get that completely. That idea of purpose though, and Vicky, please do comment on this as well. What's interesting is, there's a lot of discussion around purpose-driven organizations. And at the moment, when we are, there is a war for talent, and there's a panel at 1 o'clock all about attracting and retaining talent. Do you think that an organization that stands for something purposeful and can really align their people behind it is going to be an advantage, or more of an advantage? Or actually, at the moment, is it just about, looking at pay rates? You've got possible, minimum wages being voted at £10 an hour, etc. at the Labour Party conference. What's the balance between having a purpose and then that kind of bottom of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of, frontline minimum wage or just above minimum wage retail roles?
I think for me, certainly what we're seeing is people are more driven by that. I suppose that intrinsically motivated by being connected to a purpose-driven business, I think. But I think that that doesn't mean it has to be kind of a certain place. It doesn't necessarily have to be super duper sustainable. I think it's just more about what you connect to. So, and if you kind of connect the values together, then that's fine. I think you do have to take pay off the table. I think it was Dan Pink in his book Drive that talks about that autonomy and mastery, but taking pay off the table is critical. So if you can achieve that, then that's easier, because then what you do is just talk about what's the purpose and whether I'm connected to it. Pay and other things don't get in the way. And we've certainly kind of seen where in our business that if you've got a leader that can engage people really, really well in that purpose mindset and shared visions, and you're taking them forward, then people are less bothered about the kind of niggly bits, as long as they are being paid adequately. If they're not, then they're more focused on the bad stuff. I think that's definitely something that happens. So I think both are in play. I'm going to sit on the fence quite firmly there and say, I think both are important, and it depends on the individual and where they come from, their personal experiences, which one is more important to them, I think. I
love the idea that you have to kind of get, almost like in Maslow's, you've got to have the basics. Pink, take pay off the table, and then you can have a conversation about the duvet chart, what inspires you, whether it's a local or organizational level. Vicky, from your perspective, the idea of purpose and how it sits in the retail environment.
I think that from an individual perspective, the last sort of 18 months, people have reflected on their own personal purpose. And if that doesn't align with the company or the organization that you work for, then people have been a lot more braver about making decisions around what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And that's certainly what I've seen, and from a personal perspective as well, around actually what my own purpose is, and within the role that I did previous to this role, and actually really questioning, is it right for you? Where so much has changed in the last 18 months. If that company purpose and the values and the culture that they portray, or the company portrays, or the leadership portrays, doesn't match up with your own, then we are seeing a lot more people actually say, I'm going to find what's right for me, because life is too short. We've seen that, certainly.
And linking that whole idea of, energy and purpose, I think if your value set, your duvet chart, what you believe to be your purpose in life is aligned with the work you're doing, then I think there's that fusion actually is where the energy lies, and where you get people feeling empowered, being able to, feel autonomous around making decisions for customers, about working well with their colleagues. I think there's a real kind of perfect positive storm within that. But we're asking a lot of our leaders to be able to, lead agilely and lead with purpose. I'm interested, Vicky, from your perspective, how you think the demands on leaders has changed over the last couple of years, and maybe particularly even more recently because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it goes way back before the pandemic. I mean, we can all probably think of a leader or manager that we've worked with in the past that's been very tell and do, very autocratic, very direct sort of leadership style. And that's certainly evolved over the last decade, if not more. You know, the impact of technology, the data-driven, social media, there's so many things that have impacted actually from a personal perspective, how you would like to lead and how you expect to lead. But then I think coupled in with that as well, that there's, you know, having some of those softer skills being brought to the forefront, and especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic, around actually really focusing on individuals' well-being, really thinking about your people. It's not just around making profit. It's not just about how to read a P&L. It's not just about customer satisfaction. Actually, your people are really, really key to that. And it is circular in that respect. And as a leader, that evolution needs to be, and I think James sort of touched on it as well, around actually your own self-awareness. And self-awareness is yourself as a leader and the impacts that you have on your people, and then how that then ripples throughout the organisation, throughout your team. There is an element, and you mentioned it a few times, Mark, around the uncertainty. The uncertainty of the last couple of years, even prior to that with the retail industry, where we saw the high streets footfall start to reduce, that uncertainty for people has been there for a number of years, and the pandemic has just sped that up in a way. So being transparent and showing some vulnerability as a leader has been really important in the last couple of years, which if you try to smooth over something, you know, the reality of the situation has been very hard on so many people. And if as a leader, you're not being transparent, you're not being vulnerable, you're not being honest, then you're not going to build that trust with people. And there's so many different balls to juggle as a leader now, not just balancing the business needs, but balancing the individual needs as well as your own as well. So there has been a huge shift in the last few years as to what we expect from a leader and what you need to deliver as a leader as well.
I think that important point that you have to look after, you have to think of yourself as a leader as well. I mean, the best leaders are, I think, are a service to the organization, but taking a moment to think about what your needs are as well as what the needs of your people are. And with that level of uncertainty, how can leaders still be courageous? How can leaders still be curious about what possibilities are? How can they stop themselves sort of just managing on the short term and be more courageous, or continue to be courageous around what the future might be and bringing people with them?
I think the last year's reminded us that we can be connected. Like, you know, I've probably spoken to people more via a screen than what I have in the last 5 years. So actually we can be connected, and therefore there is that opportunity. There isn't that excuse of actually, I don't get to see that person on a day-to-day basis. And going back to what you said at the beginning, Mark, around being able to actually go out and speak to people in stores, like I can't wait to be able to do that more than what we've been able to do in the last few months. But we are connected to people differently now, and it's impacted by a larger system as well. So, and we also know that things are never going to be the same again. We spoke yesterday around it's post-pandemic. Actually, we're not. We are still living through this. It is now part of our world. It's part of how we operate. It's part of actually not about recovering from the pandemic, but how do we learn from the pandemic? How do we learn from some of the mistakes that we may have made in the last couple of years, and actually take a pause and reflect and look about actually what do we need to do to move forward. What is different, I think, is that people are braver in standing up and having a voice. They're braver to question around where they fit within an organisation from a diversity perspective. They're braver to question whether or not they feel included. And actually, as a leader, there is an opportunity for them to make a change within their companies and question some of those historical habits, the things that haven't worked, and how we've moved forward as an industry and as human species as well. I think one of my favourite quotes from the last 12 months is, I think it was from author Damien Burr, around we're not in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. So actually every single person's boat is slightly different. And how do you make sure that you really try to understand that and the impact on people as well? So, you know, there's still so many things that are coming down the pipeline with regards to Christmas, and will we have enough turkeys? Will there be Lego sets? You know, it's all these sorts of things that there's still to face with. And as an industry, retail is really strong, and we will come through it, but it will be different. It will will be different. So to be courageous, to be curious, is to actually stop, ask the questions. We can't go back to where we were 19 months ago because things have changed, and it's recognizing that and embracing that and looking at where can we influence to move forward.
Things have changed absolutely massively over the last 19 months. And one thing that has changed is the conversation, the focus on diversity. You talked a little bit there about being brave, about speaking up, about injustice. You also talked about connection. So whilst we're to some extent, we are much more connected with each other because, you know, I know you've got a lovely collection of mirrors, etc. there behind you. I know more about you than I might do if I just met you in office. But, you know, and, you know, James, we talked about this, you know, we're in a hybrid environment. How do we make sure that we deliver connection and inclusion in that hybrid environment where our conversations can get smaller and smaller? How do we make sure we are being inclusive in an environment where some of us are working from home, some of us are on the front line, and the people we're talking to often is, you know, just the same 20 people?
Yeah, I think it's much about adaptability, isn't it? We talk a lot about resilience and trying to be more resilient to change, but I think that's about kind of taking that kind of, when you're resilient to something, you kind of have to follow it. Whereas if you're adaptable, you're kind of before it. So you're able to kind of see it coming and do something with it. And I think to be inclusive is a lot, but you're using that ability to adapt, but also using dialogue and alignment. So you, by just simply humanly speaking to people and understanding, building more rapport, being more connected. Because I think when we were office bound, if you were that way, what you tend to do is you just see people, you see them in their office self, and you don't get to see kind of the in or out of that person. And, you know, unless you kind of build, that you take a proper purposeful kind of view to build rapport with your team. What we've done now is being able to get a better view. And I think in order to be even more inclusive, we've got to build on that rapport. You do, like you said, we do have to connect again. We need to find a way to connect people back, whether that be in an office or somewhere else. And I know that some people will still be quite unsure about being around people and won't want to necessarily come back to the office. So it's about, as a leader, finding a way that is inclusive for everybody, being mindful of everyone's situation, and trying to make some level of kind of, you know, inclusive kind of level that everyone can achieve. And in that way, you're going to be able to include them. And I think the other bit here is around decision making. Decision making, when you're in this environment, it's really easy just for me to sit here and make a decision and forget to tell people about it. Yeah. So if I make a decision, I need to include people in that decision, and I need to have their voice to be able to make it. And I need to let them know that I'm making it with them, rather than, you know, it's my decision and that's it. There will be some cases, I think the difference between crisis and calm is really important. When you're in crisis, people tend to look to the leader to make the decision, and they expect you to do it. So there's that level of adaptability. When you're into calm, it's a bit more flat, you know, the hierarchy. It can be a bit more inclusive. So being able to flex between, am I in crisis or calm? Do I need to include people in decisions or not? And making sure that that's kind of known about you as the leader. You're going to do that depending on the situation. Again, that's about building rapport, people knowing you as the leader, so that they know and they're aware that you're going to operate in that way. If people don't know, it becomes a shock. They get frustrated, annoyed, and then they don't follow you as a leader then in that way. So,
and again, Vicky, to your point about transparency, I think that probably plays quite well in there about being transparent. And your thoughts around how, you know, as a leader in the organization, sometimes you're having thoughts around what the future might be. You might not want to share those thoughts with the wider organization. If you're part of a PLC, you might not want to, because, you know, all sorts of things. Any thoughts about kind of how you, from Vicky, around how as an HR community, how we gauge when to start having the conversations, and when they should stay part of our mooting and musing?
You know, people aren't, none of us are stupid, and actually a lot of people see what's coming down the road. So for me, I've always tried, and especially, you know, the last 18 months in my HR roles, going through numbers of redundancy and conversations and things like that. But actually, the sooner you're able to give information, or even say, you know, we could, we know the questions that you've got and we just can't answer those at the moment, but we are working on them. So giving people that reassurance to try and eliminate some of that uncertainty certainly definitely helps. So being as transparent as you can be, but also then being honest when you don't know or you're not sure, because if you don't say anything, then that's the worst case, because people will then make up what they don't know, what they think they're going to know. And actually, you know, there's a huge war for talent, which I know you're covering in later sessions at the moment, but people will look for that strong leadership and that strong direction, and want to have that faith and trust and build that loyalty with you. And actually, if you're honest with them, if you're authentic with them, then they're likely to actually stay with you to be able to then see you through the storm, so to speak.
I think taking it back to that idea of energy, if people are expanding their energy, trying to fill in that blank or decipher what you really mean, or they're actually not being included in the conversation, so their energy is not even being faced in the direction. You know, at a time when we're all, you know, our energy levels are, you know, bumping along for many of us, kind of near the bottom. You know, I keep seeing those things that say 9 weeks to Christmas, and I keep thinking 9 weeks till I can sleep.
74 days.
Then, you know, actually, it all kind of links back through. I know in a moment we're going to move on to talk to two other fantastic panelists. I'll introduce Kirsty and Evelyn in a moment, but I'm just wondering, on a personal level, thinking right back to kind of the subject we were talking through about re-energizing, is there anything that you have done over the last sort of 19 months or anything that you are planning to do going forward for your own personal energy levels, how you're going to, you know, I invite you to do 2 minutes of stretching in your pajamas in the morning. I give you that. Honestly, it sounds like a complete, wouldn't do anything. It really sets you up well for the day. I book classes, I don't go to them. 2 minutes I can do. So let's go. James first. Anything you've done or can do that you think, right, I'm going to do this?
Well, actually, over the last 19 months, I've been studying for a master's degree in amongst all of this lot. So actually, for me, it's to stop. So so I'm going to stop. To kind of, you know, spending a lot of time both working and studying, and just, you're getting outside. You know, I have the benefit of living by the seaside and probably take it way too for granted. So yeah, getting out and amongst the wildlife and the autumn fresh air is definitely the plan.
Super, lovely. Thank you very much. Taking some time just to be. Interestingly, I'm resetting myself by starting a master's, which I started yesterday. So it is all individual and personal, isn't it? Lovely. Okay, thanks so much, James. And then Vicky, to close this part of the session.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I've come from a job where I was leaving the house at 7 in the morning, getting home at 8, 9 o'clock at night, driving 2,000 miles a month, just sitting on my bum basically 5 days a week, obviously still working very hard, but actually I have a much better work-life balance where I suddenly have all this extra time on my hands. So I've revisited things that I used to get joy from, such as going to an exercise class. I tried the getting up in the morning and doing 2 minutes of yoga, and just the extra 2 minutes in bed was much more fun. So actually revisiting some of the hobbies. So I've just recently restarted my photography course, which I'm really excited. And on the floor down here behind me is my camera and my book, and actually getting myself out in nature and taking some photos and doing something that I used to find a lot of joy in now that I have the extra work-life balance than I did before.
Super, lovely. Well, thank you very much for sharing your personal and your professional point of view. I really am sure we all appreciate it. It was lovely to chat to you. I'm going to ask you to stay on because we're going to, in a moment, hear from two other panelists, but maybe at the end we might have some questions. And just remind everyone who's joined us so far that if you do have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We have the wonderful Karen from the Retail Bulletin who will draw our attention to them at the end if I don't get a chance to look at them. But for now, thank you, James and Vicky, and I can imagine virtual clap all round from everyone. So now we're moving on to our third part of the session, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here by Kirsty Rogers and Evelyn Jari. Now I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit around who you are, what your role is, and then I'm going to launch in with some questions. So Evelyn, can we start with you? In looking so bright and sunny, my goodness.
Bright and sunny conservatory. Hello, good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me. I think I may have inadvertently interrupted your earlier chat with Vicky by switching my camera on too early, having been categorically told not to do so, but couldn't contain my excitement. So thanks for having me. I work at Currys in the legal governance and risk function. I head up the employment law team. So like Kirsty, I'm a solicitor and an honorary member of the HR and people community, particularly in the last 2 years. I have a penchant for business transformation, having been embroiled in quite a lot of it at Currys, and a particular passion and interest in all things equality, diversity and inclusion. That's me.
Thank you very much. And you're also, as we proved in our pre-calls, being a lawyer can be fun and you can be naughty and be a lawyer. Didn't we agree that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What happens on the call stays on the call.
Absolutely. It's not all just process. It's not all just process. Lovely. Thank you very much. And Kirsty, nice to see you again. We seem to find ourselves on the Retail Bulletin calls regularly. Please introduce yourself to everyone.
Morning, Mark, and morning, Evelyn. Lovely to be here again. I think this is the 5th year, and it's really lovely to be here, although I would prefer to see everyone in person, so I'm hoping we'll be back next year all together. I am also an employment lawyer, but also some fun, although my children wouldn't agree this morning after I shouted at them on the way to school. And I am head of ESG now at DWF. I'm also the office managing partner of the Manchester office, which has about 1,000 people in it. So that's been interesting over the last 18 months. So I'm working both internally and externally on sort of the social agenda of ESG, which fits very nicely with my role as an employment lawyer. So fair working practices, pay, diversity and inclusion, and build back better agenda generally. If anyone's got any answers, please let me know. DWF is a global legal business, and we are the only law firm listed on the main market, which means that we're subject to the reporting requirements that many of the retailers are subject to. So we have to do what we say because we're rated. And I've been working with retail clients all throughout my career, which is now it's well over 25 years. And I'm not saying I've stopped counting. In fact, I can't count any higher. And I've worked with many retail clients. It's been my pleasure to work most recently with Evelyn and her team, who do live and walk the walk and talk the talk. So I've got a session this afternoon, actually, with a retailer on unconscious bias, banter and courageous bystander, talking about culture. So that has become my passion, particularly recently. So that's me.
Super, lovely. Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to have you both here. We've obviously got Vicky and James hovering with cameras off in the background as well. I'm thinking, you mentioned there, Evelyn, that Currys as a business has gone through a lot of change. It was going through change before the pandemic. And actually, obviously, like most of us in the retail and hospitality business have had to change and adapt. Do you think, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what inspires and is motivating your people now as we move forward into a world living with COVID. We've all been through furlough, we've been through restructure, right sizing, all of those difficult conversations, some of which are carrying on. But what inspires and motivates people to throw back the duvet and come to work inspired in the morning now?
I do love your duvet chuck idea. I'll be stealing that one, Mark.
Deal with glee. Deal with
a brilliant idea. But I find that we are our people at Currys. We have been through a lot of transformation. We were sort of Dixon's Carphone Warehouse, and now we're rebranded as Currys. And there's been a continual change and churn. But we keep going, and I think part of the reason we keep going is because we are very much a collaborative organisation. We listen to our people, never more so than in recent times. So our approach has been very much safety first. We have obviously adapted to COVID in the same way as many other large organisations, but we've really bolstered our physical and mental well-being programmes in the last year or so. We have mental health first aiders and champions peppered throughout the business now, and mental well-being is something that's discussed in a much wider sense. It's not limited now to sort of employment lawyers in the HR community. We are also listening to our people in terms of smart working, so hybrid working, and making sure that that works and making sure that's effective has been paramount to us in recent times. We continue to take an iterative approach to it. It's about testing and learning. We're not trying to do a one size fits all. We recognize that flexibility is a big leap for lots of people, but it's also a mindset, not just a policy. So we're taking a really purposeful, intentional approach to hybrid working. James touched on the importance of inclusion in that, and we are really taking a conscious approach to make sure people are included. Big policies, but also the micro interventions that you mentioned earlier, Mark, the little things, I think have really made a world of difference to our people. We can't always do the big things quickly. They cost money, they need sign off. So we've introduced little things, such as we've introduced a golden hour, which is an hour every day where people aren't allowed to have a meeting or any calls, just a dedicated golden hour. To some people use it to catch up on emails, some people use it to do their stretches, some people use it to make lunch. And that was something that started during COVID lockdown, because people were having to run out and walk the dog or check what the kids were doing. So we've maintained that golden hour. We also introduced a Wednesdays Unplugged, another micro intervention, which is basically from sort of up until 12 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. Again, no meetings are allowed or calls. And there are a few external meetings with people like Kirsty sneak in the diary, but it's it's now a well-known thing. It's well embedded, and it's all of these little sort of interventions are. We've had phenomenal feedback from colleagues.
And that's right across the business. That's actually quite kind of best practice leading. I'm wondering if Kirsty, you know, thinking about the clients that you speak with, as well as we've got couriers here, but you know, in terms of going forward post furlough into this new ways of working, have you seen any interesting activities, anything that you think actually that's something that could be, you know, useful for all of us to hear, something new that's inspiring and motivating people out there in the retail world?
I think it is about engagement. I think purpose has become much bigger. You were talking about it earlier, but actually talking much more about that with your employees and giving them a place and a function is really critical for mental health as well as physical health. I mean, there's a lot of evidence now about the fact that if you help someone else or help something, and if your business is helping something, you will feel better about it. So I think centralizing that purpose and giving everybody a role in it, I'm definitely seeing as a critical part of those businesses that are more successful. And if you think, you know, some of the retail businesses who have led on this over the years, like IKEA, their purpose is to create a better everyday life for the many people. Who wouldn't want to work for a business that says that? Who wouldn't want to be part of that? That makes them feel better. That gives them a duvet chuck, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if you center everything around your purpose and you center it around positivity and well-being and create a positive outcome, you will achieve in a much better way the Build Back Better agenda and the culture that you need. The other thing I'm seeing is culture strategies. Businesses are starting to think about having a culture strategy. When you do the surveys at the moment, the most important thing for people is culture, but nobody's got a plan for their culture. We've got a huge business plan. So really, why haven't we got a culture strategy? And I keep saying to HR people, this is your time. The S agenda, the culture agenda is the biggest it's ever been, and people need help with it. And then all the micro changes that you've discussed, they have to be part of everybody's life, and leaders need to understand that as well. So empathy becoming really critical. And I went into our office, and I've only been in a handful of times, and we've given everybody these recyclable water bottles instead of a paper pack about return to work. Well, they were queuing up for them yesterday, and it wasn't hugely expensive, but it was a demonstration that we were thinking about the environment, thinking about our people, something that would be useful, could take to the gym if they wanted to go. I don't go to the gym. I don't even manage the 2-minute stretch, Mark, but you know.
I shall text you at 7 a.m.
Don't do that. I'm answering.
both of you talked there about things that change, and there's some deliberate interventions. There's there needs to be a more thought out culture plan. I think you're right. It's the biggest growing part of our business, actually, working on cultural strategies for organisations. But do you see both of you kind of policies and procedures that are no longer fit for purpose, whether because they don't fit with inclusion, whether they don't fit with the new ways of working, whether they don't fit with actually people reassessing and reimagining what the world of work could be like? If you talk, maybe I'll ask you both, I'll go to Evelyn first. Is there one policy that you're thinking that needs to change and I'm changing it, or that needs to change and I need the organisations to be brave enough to break it? And then I'll come to you, Kirsty.
Well, we're in a sort of, it's a perfect storm for us. It's all dovetailed quite nicely because we've just rebranded as Currys. So we've done a root branch overhaul of all of our policies anyway. And we're just looking at things now with an inclusion lens throughout. So right from onboarding throughout the entire colleague journey. So even things like our handbook, which used to be more of a sort of quite stodgy code of conduct as to what you can do and you can't do when you join us. We've changed it. The focus is much more about fostering a sense of belonging. The language is lighter. The pictures, the images are much more inclusive. Our equality diversity policy was, again, quite a legalistic document, and we've completely revamped that. And we talk more about the sort of the personal elements about equality and diversity and inclusion. How does it make you feel? How has it impacted you personally, as opposed to this sort of old-fashioned way of, if you get this wrong, the company could be sued, or the company, these are the uncapped compensation. It's much more about trying to sort of drive an empathetic approach to inclusion and diversity, and reminding people that it's beyond the 9 protected characteristics. It applies to all of us. It's about socioeconomic diversity. It's about disability in its wider sense. It embraces neurodivergence, all those things. So I feel that our policies have gotten braver, deeper, and much more personal. I couldn't tell you which one, because as I said, we're doing a whole raft, all of them, top to bottom. And they should be an easier read now, which means we'll hopefully get more people reading them.
I think it's interesting there from a diversity and inclusion perspective. I think we work in an industry that is unique in that actually we don't tend to focus on where someone's from on the whole. We're looking about, do you have the will? Can we give you the skill to move forward? Son of an Irish immigrant, he spent my first job at 15 on the butcher's counter in Sainsbury's in the Holloway Road. I love meeting people in senior roles that said, I started washing the dishes in Pizza Hut or whatever. And I think we're unique as an industry and should shout proudly about it and make sure that we continue to have those stories coming through. I think it's absolutely unique. I don't think banking or any other industry can claim this ability, you say socio-economic movement, that we can absolutely do in retail and hospitality. I'm going to come back to you because you mentioned belonging, and I just think it'd be useful just to discuss what you mean by belonging. But I'm going to quickly go to Kirsty and ask you the same question. Maybe it's in your own organisation, or maybe you see it kind of in your clients' organisations. Are you coming up against a similar policy that they want to change, and you need to persuade them to be brave enough, or something you've seen they've all, focused on this and have had to change it?
I think what we're focusing on is looking at how the world has changed. Where were you like 20 years ago? Where are you now? Where are you going to be? So what do your policies look like? Some of the difficulties businesses have had is because they've never changed from even 20 years ago. And so take data, for example. We all started using data without any rules at all and without any policies. And then suddenly we got the changes in the data protection laws and everybody's all over the place with it. And now we're all trying to deal with hundreds of data subject access requests. And it's trying to think about what's coming down the track. Where are your policies in relation to that? And how are you fit for the future? And how are you sustainable? And lots of businesses now are trying to catch up with today, but not thinking further down the line. And I think ability to change and flexibility in policies generally are two critical aspects. The other thing that I'm really seeing as a big change is whistleblowing and speak up and the requirements around that. And I think the regulators of many different sectors are getting on board with that, and it's only a matter of time because before that will be mandatory. So I'm seeing a lot more organisations thinking about that and how that might tie into things like the grievance policy and the delineation between the two. And quite a lot of businesses hold it separately, which isn't the best thing to do. Then the two need to be understood and connected. So aside from what Evelyn said, I would say ability to change, future forward, and also whistleblowing, speak up are two areas that need to be considered quite carefully. And I think also the whole climate change agenda, that is something we need to be thinking about in our hybrid policies and what we're doing and how we're communicating that to our people. I was looking at some of the statistics that say over 70% of the workforce will be Gen Z in a couple of years' time, and their expectations around that are very different. And that's, there is a war for talent. So I think, recruitment policies are going to be important around what you do and what you actually do, what you say you're going to do and what you actually do.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to you, Evelyn, around you use the term belonging, and it's been growing in its use over the last year or so. I'd love you to just explain a little bit around, you talked about empathy and creating a sense of belonging in the handbook, because both of you are talking about a bit of a more strategic approach to a policy as opposed to it being very functional. What do you understand belonging to be, and then how do you make sure that is strategically imbued into your policies?
Well, I mean, we've literally just recently revamped our dignity at work policy, and I said the shift has gone more from discussing about what happens if this goes wrong to really trying to tap into what makes people feel connected to the organisation. So Kirsty's absolutely right. We do have Gen Z and the millennials really holding organisations like ourselves to account in the ESG space, and very much so. So we're tapping into that. We're trying to understand what makes people feel connected to work. We're all professionals. We could all come in and deliver to a certain extent and then go home. But what makes you want to do that just for Currys? So for us, belonging is really about understanding what makes people tick. It's going that step further beyond. So diversity, we understand; inclusion, we understand inviting people to join the party. Belonging is really a sense of understanding allowing people to bring their real selves to work. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but that's the magic that unlocks what makes people feel that they want to be part of Currys, and they actually want to not just sort of recite our values, but live our values, what resonates with people. So ESG is a massive thing for us. Can
you just explain what ESG is for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, Kirsty's the expert on that, but it's environmental, social and governance initiatives, with a big emphasis from my perspective on the social initiatives that we're driving at the moment in terms of diversity and equality. But actually, for example, during the pandemic, we thought we sell tech. There's a lot of people at home with their kids who can't actually do their homework, their schoolwork, because they don't have enough laptops. So we did a massive drive to get all the Chromebooks and things that we had sitting in stores out to homes, on loan for free. We also have partnered with Age UK because having done a survey with our colleagues to see, again, to foster the sense of belonging and understand who do you want to work with, what would mean something to you, that there was a sort of resonating response that said we'd love to do something with Age UK and get the older generation connected with tech. So there's a massive drive to do more work in our communities, and all of that has to sort of loop back to your original question, fostered a sense of belonging at Currys.
Super. I think I'm hearing very strongly kind of looking at your policies and procedures, understanding what's important to your people, particularly your reference there, Kirsty, to Gen Z, and making sure that that's reflective of what will motivate, engage them, give them the duvet chuck, help them feel that they've made the right choice by joining your organization, they belong there. And then you'll get the incremental efforts, you'll get the commitment, you'll get the great customer service. Okay, so I know we're going to be closing our session soon, so I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Vicky and that I asked James. And Vicky and James, if you want to pop your cameras back on and wave at us. So in terms of you personally, thinking about your energy levels, what are you doing to manage, or what have you done, maybe as a micro intervention to manage your energy levels and keep you facing forward so that you can serve your organization and serve the stakeholders and clients who you look after? So I'm going to go, Kirsty, to you first.
This is my favourite child, my dog. And he gives me my energy levels because he's a Springer Spaniel. So he does require a little bit of walking every now and again. So I try and take him out, or he actually just lies underneath the desk if I'm working from home. So he gives me a lot. And also, I'm part of a choir, not a very good choir, not one that you're required to actually do an audition to get into. But we did a lot of virtual singing, but we're now back in person. So trying to get to that, and it's you don't have to go to every single rehearsal. So it's that kind of a general choir, which I find makes quite a big difference, and actually means I'm less of a boring lawyer. So.
But we've just found out, we've look, law isn't boring. In fact, now it's a chance to change the world from what we were discussing about this morning, which is fantastic. Evelyn, what have you been doing, or what are you going to do?
Well, I've embraced golden hour, having told myself that I can't necessarily give up the whole hour. I've said that I will at least take 10 minutes of golden hour to do something just for me. And it at the moment, it's usually just sort of turning up the music really loud for 10 minutes of my day and just letting it just all hang out and go loose. And it's sort of like forcing yourself to laugh. It feels odd at first, but actually if you try it and you try to laugh and you force yourself to laugh, you actually start really laughing. So I make sure I have a little 10-minute de-stress. And if I'm having to go in the office, I take my phone, my Spotify, and I just listen to music really loudly for 10 minutes every day, just to sort of de-stress. Another thing I try and do is I force myself at least once a month to just watch a webinar, attend a session on something that isn't necessarily law. And something that just gives me a slightly different perspective. And this is why I say I'm now an honorary member of the HR community, because you have some great sessions, and I have gate crashed a lot of them in the last 6 months. So that has really sort of lifted my spirits and gives me the energy to keep going.
Super, I love it. And I'm sure you're very welcome. I love the idea of doing something that's completely outside of your world. I went to a lecture last night about Jacobean palaces. So completely, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. But it was like so far removed from my world and my day job. And it was just 2 hours of completely away. And I love that. That was my version of dancing around the kitchen. Super, lovely. Well, I mean, I just see if there's any, Karen, who's in the background here from the Retail Bulletin, will let us know if there's any questions that have come through. And if there's anything you want to ask our panelists, please do. Otherwise, I just really want to say to Vicky, to James, to Evelyn and Kirsty, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for taking care of our people, making sure that you energize yourself so you can energize them. We have really learned a lot from listening with you this morning. Hopefully we'll see each other physically at our event next year in September. But for now, thank you very much to our panelists. Again, virtual claps all round. And just to remind our attendees that we are back at 1 o'clock this afternoon, where we'll be talking about attracting talent, something we all are really focusing on at the moment. So do join us, take a bit of a break, maybe dance around the kitchen listening to some music, look at a lecture on YouTube about Jacobean palaces, whatever you want to do. And we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So take care, and thank you again for your contribution to our panelists. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.